So I read a story about an old wise man. This is from long ago. And he would travel from town to town teaching wise things. And he realized that, wow, I'm using a lot of time, a lot of energy is getting lost in transition between these two things. So he went to a local farmer and said, look, I need a horse to make my travels easier. Do you have a horse? The guy said, I have one horse. And the wise man said, can I buy it? And the farmer said, yeah, you can buy it. It'll cost you $100. Now, this is back in the day when $100 was a lot of money. So the wise man agreed. He said, I can't buy it today, but I'll come back and get the horse. And from the time when he gave him the money to the time when he came to get the horse died. So when he showed up, he said, do you have my horse, sir? And the farmer said, well, here's the problem. I spent your money already, but the horse died, so I can't give you your money back. What do you want to do? And the wise man thought about it for a second, and he said to himself, okay, can I have the horse anyway? And the farmer was like, sure. So the farmer took the horse and he left. The wise man took the horse and he left. The farmer didn't think anything about it. So a month or two later, he saw the wise man coming through town again, and he stopped and he asked him, he said, hey, whatever happened with that dead horse that I gave you? He said, I made $500 on that horse. He said, how in the world did you make $500 on a dead horse? The wise man said, here it is. I went to the next town over with the horse, and I did a raffle, and I sold tickets for a horse. And I sold them for $5 a piece. And can you believe it? 102 people bought tickets for that horse. And the farmer looked at him and said, weren't people mad that you were selling them a dead horse? And he said, oh man, the winner was really mad when he found out that he was buying tickets for a dead horse. And the farmer said, well, what did you do? How did you make it right? He said, well, I gave him his money back. And I gave him $5 more. That's the end of the story. If you have to tell people it's the end of the story, you know it's not a very good story. But that's as good as it gets here, so welcome to Kingsway. Now, you hear a story like that, and you think to yourself, where is he going with this? How does this help? Quick question. Was the wise man a shrewd business owner? Yes, absolutely. But no, not really. The word shrewd, biblically speaking, all it means is a wise person, a person who's able to look at a situation, discern it appropriately, and make good decisions. But the problem in our culture is the word shrewd implies this negative connotativity. If I were to tell you, oh, you need to talk to so-and-so about buying a house, they are a shrewd businessman, you would probably think to yourself, ooh, I should talk to them. First of all, Matt's recommending them, but if they're shrewd, that means they're gonna know how to get me a good deal. And there's an element of that that's true, but there's also an element of that in the back of your head, you might be thinking, I don't necessarily care how I get the deal, I only care that I get the deal. And that's not necessarily what the Bible implies. And that's gonna go right to our story today. Now, before we jump into today's story, I need to prepare some of you who are newer to this thing called church. The Bible is a newer thing to you. You may have heard about it, but you don't understand it, and that's fine. My job is to do my best to explain it to you. So today we're going to look at what I think may be the hardest parable that Jesus tells. A parable is a figure of speech that is intentionally vague in order to make you draw into the moment. We're told throughout the book of Isaiah that when the Messiah came, Jesus, that he would speak in parables to confound or confuse people. And he does that a lot. But Jesus says, if you seek me with all of your heart, you will find me. So even when Jesus is difficult to understand or confusing at times, don't give up. Keep chasing him, keep pursuing him. So in every parable, there's two things you need to grab onto. One is the meaning. What did Jesus mean when he said it? But two is the significance. And the significance means, what does it mean for me today? So there's what Jesus originally meant in his culture, in his context, to the people he's talking to. And then when I answer that, I've got to ask myself the second question, what does it mean for me today, in my situation, and in my context? And those two things are always gonna have overlap, but may have uniqueness based off my life and my story. And I tell you that because at the very, very, very beginning of Luke, when we started here, I think it's in January, 18 months ago or so, I read this passage to you. And it comes from Luke chapter 1, and it says this in verse 1. Many have undertaken to draw up an account of the things that have been fulfilled among us, just as they were handed down to us by those who from the first were eyewitnesses and servants of the word. In other words, all that means, Luke is basically telling a guy named Theophilus, which we're going to see in a second. I went all around the world. I studied about Jesus. I interviewed the people who saw him. I interviewed the people who were there that day, and I wrote down what they told me. In fact, he says in the next part, with this in mind, since I myself have carefully investigated everything from the beginning, I too decided to write an orderly account for you, most excellent Theophilus, so that you may know the certainty of the things you have been taught. In other words, Theophilus is a believer, and he's heard about Jesus, he's been taught about Jesus, but he wanted to know more. He wanted a better understanding. So he hires Luke. Luke travels all around with Peter and Paul and Mary, and he learns, and then he comes and writes this account. Luke, and then the second part of the book, Acts. That's important because Theophilus is obviously a decently wealthy man. He obviously has resources because he underwrites the entire trip for Luke to be able to live and survive and travel while he's doing this writing for us. And I say that because Luke is the only one who records today's story for us, the only one. And you have to ask yourself the question, why did Luke include this parable of Jesus and nobody else did? Matthew, Mark, and John left it out. We don't see it anywhere else. Why is that? We get hints of it, I think, in the book of James, and we get hints of it in other places, but the only one who specifically says it is Luke. So let's take a look at the story. Luke chapter 16, verse 1. Jesus told his disciples, there was a rich man whose manager was accused of wasting his possessions. So he called him in and he asked him, what is this I hear about you? Give an account of your management because you cannot be my manager any longer. The manager said to himself, what do I do now? My master is taking away my job. I'm not strong enough to dig and I'm ashamed to beg. I know what I'll do so that when I lose my job here, people will welcome me into their houses. So he called in each one of the master's debtors. He asked the first, how much do you owe my master? 900 gallons of olive oil, he replied. The manager told him, take your bill, sit down quickly, and make it 450. Then he asked the second, how much do you owe? 1,000 bushels of wheat, he replied. He told him, take your bill and make it 800. End of the illustration. The master then commended the dishonest manager because he had acted shrewdly. Now, if you heard that story, would you not think to yourself, that's not shrewd, that's dishonest, right? You would think to yourself, how would I feel if I had an employee and that employee, I heard some things about him like, hey, I've lost trust in you, I'm firing you. But there's a gap here in time. Like, you're not fired today, get your stuff in order, and then you'll be done, whatever, 2 weeks from now, whatever the time. Like, we aren't told a time. Like, you're going to be gone here in a little bit. And in the meantime, that guy goes out and undercuts all my business and negotiates with other people. And instead, the owner looks at him and is like, that was smart, dude. Good job. All right. See ya. You still lose your job, but hey, well done. That was smart. And then Jesus tells that story. And you think to yourself, what is wrong here? So here's the thing. When you come across this, again, I think it's the hardest parable Jesus tells. We need to know this. You always have to compare this parable in light of everything else Jesus taught. There can't be contradiction in that because Jesus is truth. So if what he says here and what he says here appear to contradict each other, it's obviously my understanding that's the problem. So then how do I harmonize those two things? And here's one thing I want you to know for sure. Jesus is not encouraging dishonesty or deception. So what is he encouraging? Well, everything he says after that reveals it to us. I just stopped it before we got to the rest of that. So I'm going to give you today, I'm going to give you 3 keys for unlocking this parable, and then I want to come back and I want to ask you a really hard question and have you look internally for a second about your own life, all right? Here we go. Key number 1. Use wealth wisely. Use wealth wisely. So in Luke chapter 16, verse 8, Jesus goes on and he says, for the people of this world are more shrewd in dealing with their own kind than are the people of the light. So let's just break that down. He's starting to give you meaning to what he just told. We know the people of the light would be anybody who considers themselves a follower of Jesus Christ. How do I know? Well, for one, Jesus often taught and said, you are the light of the world. So we know that he's referring to us, those who believe in Jesus. But notice this, the rebuke, the commendation, if you will, is he is saying to them, hey, the people of this world understand shrewdness better than the people of light. The people of light, the people of God, the people who call themselves Christians better pay attention because you haven't figured this out yet. It's an invitation for you, for me, to think deeply about what Jesus means. And what is it he's trying to get to? He wants us to act shrewdly. So I want you to think about this for a minute. When was the last time you built a house for your stuff? Now, before you answer that, here's what this looks like in my life. I just added a second shed on my property. A second shed, because the first shed wasn't enough. And my second shed is specifically going to be my woodworking shed. So I could move all my woodworking stuff into this small little shed so that I could make a workout area in my garage so that my boys and I could work out. And we could save money. This is how I justified it with my wife. We could save money on a yearly membership by working out in the garage so that we could have my woodworking in the shed. And oh, by the way, think about all the sawdust that was a problem in the garage. And this is a great idea. So I built a house for my stuff. Some of you are like, I know exactly what he's talking about. Because yours wasn't a shed, it was a third-car garage. Or it was a bigger closet, or a bigger basement, or a basement. Because you bought a house, you're like, you know what we need, baby? We need a basement. Why? Because our house needs a house. Our house needs a house for our stuff. Because see, what happens when you have a basement, you don't actually have to go through your stuff and deal with it and figure out what you're gonna do with it. You just put it out in the basement for that day that never comes, that someday your kids are gonna have to deal with and go through all your stuff and figure out what they're gonna do. And what they're gonna do, they're gonna go buy another house. We're gonna call it a storage unit. And they're gonna buy a house for your stuff that they didn't know what to do with it. It's got sentimental value. Because I remember when mom and dad and grandpa, and we just keep handing our stuff down to each generation. And so there are people out there making millions of dollars housing your stuff. And if you pay the right person the right amount of money, they'll come in and renovate your house for your stuff so that your stuff can have a nicer house, right? You can put better stuff on the wall, and you can put a sink in there so you feel more comfortable, and you get power run to you. I actually talked to a friend who's an electrician, like, can I get power so that my woodworking house has power so that my stuff can not feel like it's left out of power? And I'm doing this I care about my stuff way too much. Am I the only one? Some of you, you built elaborate closets for your shoes and your purses to display them to yourself. And every once in a while, you invite someone over to look at your stuff and go, isn't my stuff amazing? And they go home and talk to their spouse and they say, my stuff needs a house. You know why? Because her stuff has a house and it was super cool. And my stuff needs a house. And then what happens, you know what we'll do? We'll develop apps for our phones where we can actually take pictures of the house for our stuff and we'll put it out there so we can create house stuff jealousy so everybody else can look at it and say, they have arrived in life. Welcome to America. This is how we do it. Now here's the problem. Is this wise? I mean, don't get me wrong. I just bought a shed, right? There's no condemnation. But I feel the weight of this parable. So Jesus is just encouraging us, just stop and think about it for a minute. But here's the second key. Understand where you are in your story. In your story. So remember, the account manager, if you will, he's been told, hey, I've heard rumors about you. You're not doing a very good job. And so I got to let you go. And there's a gap between when he's been let go and his last day. You're going to have a last day. I don't know if you know this or not. In a few weeks here, we're going to talk about the second return of Jesus Christ. I've gotten some emails. Hey, what are the dates on that? I don't want to miss it. I'll tell you what, real quick, so that nobody can miss it. If you're here every Sunday, I promise you won't miss it. But if you're waiting for that sermon for me to tell you, here are the nations of the world that you need to be looking out for and the events that they're going to do, and here's the day or the hour, the month, the year, I don't know those things. So I'm sorry, some of you are going to be frustrated by what I didn't tell you. But what I know is this: you are going to have a last day. And your last day might come because on the way after church today, tragically, you were in a car accident or had a heart attack or a cancer or a stroke or an overdose. But you're going to have a last day. If Jesus should return in 30 days, there will be a last day. And so that's the point of that part of the story. It's Jesus looking at us and saying, realize you're going to die, you've been fired, and there's going to come a last day where the owner's going to show up and say, what'd you do? That's why in chapter 16, verse 9, Jesus says, I tell you, use worldly wealth to gain friends for yourselves, so that when it's gone, you will be welcomed into eternal dwellings. Real quick, there's a passage, I think it's John chapter 14, I think it's verse 2. And the King James did a disservice to all of us. No offense to the King James. For those of you who love the King James, it's a great translation. But this passage, they didn't get it right. And in John chapter 14, verse 2, I think it's that verse, the King James translates Jesus' words into mansions. And so that's given a lot of us who grew up in King James only churches this perspective that if I am good here on earth, one day when I get to heaven, there'll be a mansion waiting for me. Not only is that not biblical teaching, it's not even what Jesus said in John chapter 14. What Jesus did say is, my Father's house has many rooms. And Jesus is preparing the disciples in John 14 through 17, and he's saying, I am leaving, but I'll be back to get you. And while I'm gone, I'm preparing a place for you. In my Father's house, there are many rooms, and I will prepare a place for you. The word there is not mansion. It's critical, because today, many corrupt preachers want to leverage that and take advantage of you. You should never have the perspective, if I do good here, I'll buy a place in heaven. Can't do it. You don't have enough money, I promise. The other thing you should never have in mind is, ooh, if I do good here, I get a bigger mansion in heaven. You know, the irony of ironies, you hear people joke all the time about putting another jewel in their crown, right? Oh, I did something good, I got another jewel in my crown. You know, you go to the book of Revelation, chapter 4, chapter 5, we see the courtroom of heaven, and we see the Father seated on the throne. There's Jesus there on the throne with him, and all of the elders in front of the throne are taking off their crowns and laying him at his feet as they bow down and worship him. Whatever jewels you've added to a crown, when you see him, you're gonna say, that wasn't worth anything, and you're just gonna lay it down. So you shouldn't hear the story and think to yourself, well, if I do good, I'll get a greater reward there. You will get a greater reward, but here is what that looks like. People. Because the only thing that can go forward with us are people. You can't take your house, you can't take your car, you can't take your shoes or your purse, or the houses for your car and your shoes and your purse. It all stays behind. And so I have to understand where I am at this moment in history. I don't know if I have 30 days left till I die, or Jesus returns, or 40 years, or 30 years. I turn 48 tomorrow. Wow, thank you. I love you. Appreciate the honesty, right? Yeah. Yeah, I just celebrated 25 years of marriage this past week, and my pastor's been my mentor. I texted him. He was trying to call me. He's like, I can't answer. I'm going out with my lovely wife, celebrating 25 years. He goes, 25 years? What a great start. And I was like, I was feeling really good about 25. So you texted that. Right? But I don't know. So today, I need to consider myself fired. Fired from this life. And I've got a gap of time between now and the last day, whatever that is. And I need to think about, evaluate reality of life in light of that day that's coming. And that leads us to the third key. The third key is this. Use your wealth here to gain eternal friends. Use your wealth here to gain eternal friends. There's a lot of different ways that you could play this out. A lot of different ways. That's the beauty of it. When I get the heart of it and I get the conviction of it, then I start to see life isn't about more and more and more and more. Life is about leveraging whatever I've been given so that when the last day comes, not only am I feeling really good about it, there's gonna be a bunch of people there with me. Real quick question, when you think about your life, do you know anybody who doesn't have the gospel? Do you know anybody, because some of you don't know what the word gospel means, that's fine. Does anybody in here know somebody who doesn't have a relationship with Jesus? If you can answer yes to that, start to ask yourself the question, how can I leverage what God has entrusted to me so that on my last day, when I get there, they're gonna be in a room in the house of the Father next to me. And they might even come out one morning, if there's mornings in heaven, and I wake up and I see them and I go, hey man, how are you? And they say, I just wanna say thank you. If you hadn't showed up that day when my tree fell on my house and I was in such despair, and I remember you helped me cut down the tree. You went and bought food for everybody that day. You went and rented a truck in order to help us haul off all that stuff. I could never understand why you did that. But you did that and I'm here. Yesterday at our parent seminar, I told some stories about my life. And one of the stories I told was about my great-grandmother. Her name was Grandma Nikki. I don't remember Grandma Nikki because she died when I was like 2 or 3, but I remember her house always smelled like cookies. And I know this, my dad, he doesn't know his dad. And so the man who became his dad, Mr. Nickerson, his mom was Grandma Nikki. She was a good woman. She was a great woman. That's what I get from the stories my dad tells. And Grandma Nikki took Bob Nickerson and his brothers under her care and made sure that they were loved and cared for, so that now, 2 generations down the road, there's a guy standing on stage telling people about Jesus because of Grandma Nikki. Yeah. You can clap for my grandma. Sometimes I like to think that Grandma Nikki is cooking cookies waiting for me. What does this look like? I mean, you can play this out in a lot of different ways. I've got a friend who, if you're new to Kingsway, we had a school here. And the school's now launched in its own independent thing. And it was awkward for those of you who went through that with us. But one of my friends, he's passionate about seeing the unity of these two things and seeing the two things be one. And so he went out of his way to support them in a very unique way, to build a bridge between us and them and not ever put his name on it. Just made sure they knew that this was on behalf of the church. I got another friend who, he knows a family in need, so he went and used his own resources to make sure that they had education for their children. I got another friend who put off buying a car he needed, not wanted, needed, so that he could give money to this campaign our church has been doing called Relentless Pursuit. Because he figured he could drive around this thing a little bit longer until he got to the end of that. Because even though he was just one small drop in an ocean, he realized that a lot of drops together make an ocean. I know another family in this church who received a large inheritance and decided that they were going to take a percentage of that inheritance and to give it. And it was the seed money that's building the space for our DCS on the other end of the building. Yeah, these are people in their own unique ways are asking themselves, how do I be shrewd with what God has given me? And you're gonna have your own story for that. Sometimes my greatest fear, though, as your pastor and somebody who loves you dearly, is that some of you aren't gonna wrestle with it. You're never gonna ask the hard question. You're never gonna ask yourself, Jesus, what do you want me to do? I mean, I could go on and tell story after story after story. I remember one gentleman, I saw him this morning, he shook his hand. He came up to me one day, it was the most awkward thing in the world because we didn't know each other at the time, and he hands me an envelope, but it's got a wad of cash for thousands of dollars. And I'm like, this is how guys like me end up in the news. What is happening? And he said, you know more people in need than I do. I need you to give this to somebody. I was like, we can't do this like this. I need to find a way to be above board. But here's the thing. I'd been praying and fasting for months. One of my friends is a missionary, and his family has some special needs children. And they're on the mission field, and I just felt this burden for them. They were coming back on furlough, and God put the desire in my heart to provide a vacation for them. But I went to my wife, said, what kind of money do we have? And she's like, yeah, we got a few $100s. And I'm like, that's not going to buy a vacation for a family in Florida. And so when he gave me the money, I said, I have a dream. Would you help me fulfill this dream? He's like, yeah. So we did it above board, made sure there was accountability, and we gave it to the organization so that he and his family could go on vacation. I mean, these are people who are catching the vision of what Jesus is talking about. Here's what Jesus goes on to say in chapter 16. Verse 10, he says, whoever can be trusted with very little can also be trusted with much. And whoever is dishonest with very little will also be dishonest with much. So if you've not been trustworthy in handling worldly wealth, who's going to trust you with true riches? I think about that for a second. First of all, Jesus is drawing a distinction between money and real riches. Money isn't real riches. It's just money. It's a piece of paper. It's a real thing. You're going to need it today to eat. So don't feel bad about making it. Don't feel bad about having it. You need it. But it's not the real thing. The real thing are people. It's the only thing that can go with you. He goes on in verse 12. And if you have not been trustworthy with someone else's property, in other words, everything you have isn't yours. Not because the bank owns it. Even if you pay it off before you die, it's all God's. He made the world and everything in it. So when he gives it to you, it still belongs to him. He's just letting you use it. That's the point. So who's going to give you property of your own? If you can't show you can handle a piece of land or a bank account, how in the world can he trust you with true riches? And here's the real kicker. No one can serve two masters. You will either hate the one and love the other, or you'll be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money. Some of you are clapping for that. Here's the real cool thing about this. The word for money there, so I ripped on the King James. Now let me rip on the NIV for a second. The real word for money there is the word mammon. You may have heard that growing up if you grew up at a church, mammon. And I don't know what it means either, but mammon, ironically, is an ancient deity that is all about wealth, riches, and money. So the correct translation in our language is money, but without that little detail, you miss the point. Jesus is drawing a direct connection between my heart and my wallet. And what he's saying is your money's gonna go, or your heart's gonna go, wherever your money goes. I said that backwards. Your heart's gonna go wherever your money goes. You cannot give your money to God and give your money to a demon. You're gonna pick. So if I invest in the things of this world, I am essentially bowing down to this deity. Therefore, money is my God. But if I give my money to God, say, God, it's your life. I gotta have a house, I gotta have food, I gotta have a car, I gotta have all these things. But God, what could I do? What could I do to partner with you in this world? Now I've given all my money to God. And I've just asked that question, God, what do you want to do in this world? And how can you use me to take part in it? All right, so I told you we would build at this moment. Here's the hard question for you. You ready? If your last day were today, would you have a clear conscience before God for how you have shrewdly used your money to build eternal friendships? I want you to vision. You're on the last day, right? God's there. He's asking you to give an account, whatever that looks like. And again, you can't buy your way in. You can't earn a bigger house. It's none of that. But he just says, tell me what you did with everything I gave you. Are you going to have stories? Are you going to be like, oh, Jesus, man, there's this one time, and Mary should be here somewhere. Do you remember Mary? I remember Mary. Yes, I know who Mary is. Will you have stories? I want you to have stories. Let me get you to this thing that God's been doing in me. So right now, there's a group of us, and we're wrestling with, God, what do you want to do with the rest of this building? When our school left the building, there was roughly, I'm gonna ballpark here, 130,000 square feet. So our Relentless Pursuit campaign that we're in the middle of is filling some of that, and we are right on the brink of launching 2 new things, and I'm so stoked. I can't wait to do the open house and walk through with you guys. It looks fantastic. Team has done a great job. At church, thank you for investing. You have crushed it. Thank you. Thank you. No, yeah. I'll let you clap in a second, all right? Time-wise, let me say it. Okay. But here's the kicker. There's a lot of space left. So we've got a team together. We've been dreaming and planning. And so I just started praying and asking God, what do you want to do? I don't have any magic answer. We're going to invite some of you into helping us with that feedback. Like, you have any thoughts? What can we do? But I started praying, and God immediately dropped some verses on my heart. Matt, I want you to think about this, and I want you to think about this, and I want you to think about this. And I'm going, okay, God, what do you want to do with that? I don't know yet. And one of the verses he took me to was in Matthew chapter 25. And here in Matthew chapter 25, we're standing on the last day, and everybody is separated into what Matthew 25 calls the sheep and the goats. And I'm not here to preach that whole text. But in essence, on his right are those who understood everything that Jesus said in Luke chapter 16, the verse we just looked at. And on his left is everybody who didn't. Sorry for those of you, my family is partly up here today, so you chose the wrong side of the room. But on his right, he looks at them and he commends them. Great job. You get it. Come in and welcome to your master's happiness. And they don't get it. Like, what are you talking about? Matthew chapter 25, verse 40. The king will reply, truly I tell you, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers or sisters of mine, you did it for me. So in other words, every time you saw a need and you stepped in and met it, every single time you did that, you weren't doing it for them. You weren't doing it for your cousin or your neighbor, your coworker, your boss, your school worker, or your enemy. No. Every time you did it for me. And then he goes on, he says, for I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me in. I needed clothes, you clothed me. I was sick, you looked after me. I was in prison, you came to visit me. What will it be like on that day when Jesus evaluates our entire life and he's like, you got it! Good job. Come in. There's so much joy in here. Oh, is it because there's a big house waiting for me? A what? What do you need a house for? There's no bad weather anymore. There's not even a sun. The sun is gone because God is our light. What do you need a house for? No. Yeah, all you need is a room. Why? Because I'm here. And you know who else is here? Your cousin, your child, your grandparent, your ex-husband, your boyfriend, your neighbor, your coworker, that guy you've been doing business with who you really wanted to rip him off, but you felt convicted by the Spirit and you didn't. So you did what was good for him and for you. They're here. They're all here. Why? Because you leveraged your resources to bring them with you. They're all here. And the king will say to those on his right, come, you who are blessed by my Father, take your inheritance, the kingdom prepared for you since the creation of the world. Man, God's building an eternal house. One, are you going to be there? And two, who's going with you? I know this, I want to go to heaven when I die. And I want to take as many people with me as I can. So I don't know how this is going to land for you, but I hope you start to ask some hard questions about what you do with what God has given you. Let's pray. Our Lord and God, thank you for your faithfulness to us. Thank you for hard parables that challenge us and teach us and correct us and rebuke us. They inspire us. They make us look inside and in grace go, okay, God, I got a limited amount of time left till that last day. I want to leverage everything I have so that in eternal dwellings, there'll be other people there. God, help us to face that question authentically and not just store up treasures on earth. God, I love you. Thank you for your faithfulness to me, to us. So give us a vision, Father, for what you might do through us if we partnered with you. And then, God, give us the courage and the boldness to act on that vision. We ask all this in Jesus' name.